Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Vanessa Toves. I am 𝗦𝗲𝘀𝗀𝗶ecie subject matter expert for Microsoft Technologies. 𝗦𝗲𝘀 is a data protection and data security company. By trade, I'm a Microsoft 365 solutions architect, and all that means is I've worked with Microsoft enterprise technologies like SharePoint and SQL and their BI suite from the very first versions on-prem and followed that up into the cloud. Today, we're going to talk to you about protecting your data from a cyber incident. All right, let's get started. We have a lot to cover in this 20 minutes, but make no mistake, your data is not immune from compromise, right? From an attack, a ransomware attack. It's not immune from data loss. When I started with 𝗦𝗲𝘀 about 4 years ago, the daily incidents or the incidents of ransomware were not daily. Today, it's daily. So that trend has changed. It has shifted. And we only have to look to Microsoft for their own words. So if many of you are familiar with the Digital Defense Report, if you're not, you need to read this because you need to understand what the ecosystem is facing, right? In order to understand where the gaps are in your own infrastructure, in your own protection of 365, you only have to look to understand like compromised credentials, compromised endpoints. They're still number 1 and number 2. And how does it happen? How is it? Why is the 6,000 MFA fatigue attempts of interest to you? Well, it's not just those 6,000, right? Not everyone uses Microsoft's MFA. We, 𝗦𝗀𝘀, we use Okta as a good example. So the millions of and hundreds of thousands and millions of transactions underneath each one of these attacks, this is the criminals that are trying every single thing. So always think about these criminals and what Microsoft and other cloud companies are facing as this rock'em sock'em, right? The criminal is going to do one thing, and then Microsoft's going to come back and try and thwart that, right? So think about compromised credentials, what you're facing in terms of this incident response. Why is it important to understand that 60% of human-operated ransomware attacks is done with remote encryption? How does that affect you, right? How is that going to change what you need to do to prepare with your team? Now, when we talk about that, right, the first part of an attack is the of the cyber incident might be the compromise of a credential, gaining access to your infrastructure or your cloud infrastructure. The second part is what they do with your data, deletions, encryptions, modifications, and such, right? They're trying to disrupt your business. So you need to also understand what it means for your organization during an incident response. Why is the pairing of encryption and exfiltration, which is now 16%, and why is that important for you? And what do you need to do there? We'll talk about that. These numbers that you're seeing that are coming out of the Digital Defense Report, it's not just that it's 60% or 13%, but it's also about the year-over-year increase, right? Please read that, understand what's at stake, understand the threats. Now, the NIST framework, if you haven't heard of the NIST framework, it's ultimately it is guidance, right? In North America, it's the NIST framework. Around the world, there's different frameworks that are very similar in terms of their approach. What an organization is going to do in terms of how they're going to protect their identity layer, right? Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. The NIST 2.0 framework, which just barely updated, it added the govern aspect, and it went a little deeper into every one of these areas. So this guidance that is being provided to organizations, you might have some semblance of it, right? Not everyone follows all aspects of it, but we're going to talk now about the team. There's an incident response team, a cyber incident response team. Right? There's all kinds of incidents in an organization, but this team's comprised of members across the organization, from your backup admin to your security team to analysts that are going to help with looking through this data, the IT leadership team, even your communications team, your risk management, a number of individuals, and each of them are looking for answers, evidence, and at different points of time throughout the response, different actions that they can take. And this is where 𝗦𝗀𝘀𝘀's architecture and what 𝗦𝗀𝘀 is doing goes beyond that of just a backup and restore. So when we look at the entire cyber incident response, and once again, the titles of these, or even just how many of these buckets might be a little bit different for your team, but ultimately there should be something like this. You are the champion of the 365 world. You're the champion of your data, which means you need to reach out to your organization. You need to say, how are we preparing? Do we have a team? What is it? What are the stages? What is it that you need that we can provide? How can we be of assistance? Right? You need to know things before, what you have to do during, and what you have to do after. Right? So when we look at the threat monitoring and incident response and event analysis, they're looking. Remember, you're looking at Microsoft 365. This team is looking at your entire infrastructure, cloud or actual local network infrastructure. So you have a part to play. There are things that you can do and say, what is it you're trying to determine at this point? And know what you have with your license and what you can provide back. One of the things too is Microsoft 365 has its own alerts. Right? Depending on your license, you have different types of alerts available. And those alerts are things that you can help the organization. Hey, we have these alerts. Are you ingesting this data, right, into your systems that you're investing in? Like organizations are, they're buying things like an EDR or an XDR or a SIEM and SOAR. Right? They're investing in protecting the perimeter. You need to know, hey, cybersecurity team or cyber response team, what are you doing with 365? And there's a lot of information they can gain. The other thing that you can do is about these alerts, right, that have been going on since the beginning of, probably very early. I won't say at the beginning of 365, but things about hardening what your response is. So like the impossible travel, simple. Vanessa logged in from Jacksonville, Florida. Vanessa logged in 5 minutes later from Australia. It's not possible. So unless you have a protocol, a plan that's going to help you stop that for Vanessa's account, right? Whoever the criminals are, they're going to continue the act. So you're going to create these protocols and include that in this response to say, all right, we're going to reset the password, right? We're going to force the log out of all devices. We're going to revoke the MFA sessions. We're going to scan the device for malware, and then we're going to send that user to training now, or to our training. And so there are things that you can do all along and throughout the incident response so that you're helping this, drive the solution. From a compromised credential, you need to know what's at stake. Today, in the world of integrations and SSO, right, you have both this local and network infrastructure, which you're not really taking part of anymore. You don't have a server anymore on-prem, but you're now part of a cloud infrastructure or a cloud offering for an organization. Right? So 𝗦𝗲𝘀𝗀𝗏 is one of those. We're a 100% SaaS platform, so we don't have physical servers. So this compromise of a credential, regardless of where it started, it could have started on an endpoint. Remember, compromised credentials and compromised endpoints, one of the top three, or two of the top three. The attack vectors that you're going to deal with that are most of the attack vectors for 365, federated trust, account synchronization, and admin accounts. And it's what those accounts have the ability to access. Right. Last year's digital defense report, a good example of that is last year's digital defense report. It said 99% attempt to tamper with the backups. Right. So when you have backups, whether they're on-prem on servers or in the cloud, right, this is what those criminals are trying to access and shut you down. So all throughout the incident response, let's ask the questions. All right, guys, maybe we're not using Microsoft's MFA, but you know what you can do? You can make sure that all the vendors that are accessing your information, you have dedicated accounts. Because with 𝗦𝗲𝘀𝗀𝗏, we're asking our customers, we want a dedicated account. We want you to put our account into a conditional access policy. We want you to limit the resources that this account has access to, and you can limit even the IP ranges of where we're going to call. Know what you can do to true up and secure your own perimeter of 365, right? The other thing about having dedicated accounts is that when that incident response, that incident analysis phase is occurring, right, which is the next thing that's going to happen, they'll be able to isolate the activities that it's we'll just call it DCP, 𝗦𝗲𝘀 Cloud Platform, that was created, that token, right, that refresh token that was used. You have to be able, your team has to be able to be able to segregate this. You can also turn around with your vendors and these access points and say not just what people can do with the conditional access policy, create alerts as to what they can't do, right? Understand what's going to be asked and asked of you throughout. When you're going through this, like platforms like, organizations like 𝗦𝗲𝘀𝗀𝗃, we are truing up our environment and ensuring that in case you do experience a compromised credential, that compromise can reach into your backups. Absolutely, it's an admin with valid access and delete snapshots. How is that? Well, you need to be able to have the ability to roll back, right? So know what your vendors, the vendors that are housing your data, whether it's backup or any other third-party integration, what are they going to do to protect your data in case there was a compromised credential, right? Let's talk about the incident analysis phase. This is right before the decision is made. The decision of, are we experiencing a cyber attack? Is this a breach? What is it? Right? What are we dealing with? Part of what your responsibility is, you can raise your hand to say, hey, cybersecurity team, you know what we can do? We can provide you a lot of metadata about the tenant. I can provide you every single week or every 2 weeks, we can give you a snapshot of this metadata, of the users, of the groups. Because when people are doing an analysis, so what people are doing is, when they're doing an analysis, you have to say, this is where we are now, and this is what it was before, and is there a difference? So you can provide them that type of asset. I would suggest when you're extracting this data via PowerShell that you don't save it on a SharePoint site or a OneDrive site or a laptop. Work with them to save this information somewhere in case you're experiencing what's called a systemic identity attack for 365, where your Azure is locked out to you and your organization. You need this information. That team needs access to this information. All right. Now we'll continue on here in terms of what else you're going to be expected to answer. So when you're thinking about this incident, and that security team is trying to determine, where could it have started? What are we dealing with? Are we dealing with deletions or encryptions, modifications? What are we dealing with? Right? You need a point of reference that states, unlike the impossible travel, which is user-based, you need to know about your data changes, right? So features that we build, in our platform for our data security, is that we understand what your data was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, yesterday, this morning. So utilizing that and allowing you to tap into that to be alerted, right? That's extremely powerful for you and your cyber incident response team. So the incident responses, we're continuing along scope and containment. Scope and containment simply is, I need to prepare. We're getting ready to prepare for the recovery and remediation. I need to make sure I can quarantine, right? Our security team understands where this threat came through. What are we dealing with? And in cases like that, I know that I've had 32 SharePoints affected, 1,300 OneDrives were affected in some state or another, right? One of our largest SharePoint site collections, a 4 terabyte site, affected. I need to have this detail because I'm going to be asked prior to that, the recovery, to clean up. What is very different for you, for 365 versus like a laptop, desktop, or server, is that when recoveries are done to those, they're just replacing what was there. There's no footprint to the prior version. That's not the same for OneDrive. It's not the same for SharePoint, right? So you're going to have to make a decision on how you're going to clean up this data. Right? You need an asset that provides you and says, here's the 504,000 files. And you're going to use PowerShell to likely go purge that data out and get it out of your tenant, right? So preparing for the recovery and remediation, this is where you have to have those options, right? If you don't have the option of recovery or different recovery points, it's going to be a very painful experience for you to try and figure out what data is still good for you in your tenant, right? How are you going to step back from that? Now, backing up your SharePoint, backing up your Exchange, your Teams, your OneDrive, those are core things, foundational things that 𝗦𝗲𝘀𝗀𝗃 has done for years. you need to find and understand what the granularity, the different use cases are that you're going to need. I need to be able to recover this file or search for certain things and get them out of the backup because maybe they were malicious. Right? There's enough of those features and those requirements. You must be and represent and be the champion to the requirements of how you need to recover. So in so many cases, right, the admins for 365 are underrepresented in a lot of the meetings I'm in. Right? So be a champion for what you know in terms of the recovery of the data that you're aware of. Now let's talk briefly, we only have a couple more slides. We'll talk about the encryption, right? The impact of encryption to your recovery. Now most companies, right, have a prior point of time. Almost every single backup company is going to have a prior point of time. But what is occurring, right? When organizations are dealing with this, they might have what's called, they're going to find what their dwell time was. How long has this criminal been in our environment? And that dwell time could be, when I first started, it was in like 60 days before it was, someone was found, criminal was found. Now, in some cases, it could be maybe 14 to 28 days, something along those lines, a lot less, but still, they're keeping a small footprint as long as possible and encrypting things over time. So your OneDrive may not be encrypted all at once. They're doing this in a stealth way to remain as quiet as possible. Now we're going to talk about the time sensitivity of the data that's in the tenant, right? It's not just that you have files in an M&A acquisition site or you have an RFI site or a bidding site, right? But you think about time sensitive data. That bidding team has a deadline for Monday to submit the package, and right, that team has worked on this bid for the last 3 months, and they're submitting it. They're submitting it to the state of California, and the state of California has a hard deadline. Now you experience a cyber attack, and that cyber attack, now you only have your incident response, cyber incident response team, security team says, all right, it's like 2 weeks. All right, we can go back 2 weeks. So let's recover back to a prior point in time. And that is the impact. That's extremely painful for you because not everything, like I said, gets impacted at the same time, right? At the same rate. One of the features too, like what 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 looking at in our data protection is not just to be able to let you recover to a prior point in time, but to be able to recover and build a snapshot on the fly that gives you the last known clean file, right? So that's very different, which means you're not just going to save time, you're going to save and return back to the user, to the process, the data, right? The last known good file. Now, the final step, of course, you might be done. You're off and running. You're making sure everything's been recovered, but that doesn't mean the work isn't done, right? The work's still going on. The risk management team is looking for some details. Hey, you said 504,000 of our 2 million files were encrypted. We know 16% of encryptions are also exfiltrations. We need to know what was in there. What are the files that were encrypted? This is a very hard thing for most organizations to realize about how to support this incident response throughout. Now, we'll wrap this up and we talk about this data protection. Your data protection, you play a role in cyber incident response. Know what you're going to be asked. Be part of that team if you can be, because make no mistake, Microsoft 365, your data that you've invested in, both license, people, data, solutions, migrations, it is not immune to attack, right? All right, well, thank you so very much. We really appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. Please feel free to take a look at our product tours. You can also set up a proof of concept. All right, have a great day.